really appreciate you coming out this evening to talk about this. I'm one of the co-authors with Councilmember Yang on repealing 2 low-level offenses in the city of Minneapolis, and we're going to talk more about that today. And we're also going to talk more about how these are connected to something a little bit bigger. I just looking forward to having a conversation about this tonight, but part of why I think it's advantageous for us to be repealing these low-level offenses now is because I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about these bigger issues a little bit more, and to talk about race, which I think has been hard for us to do in the city of Minneapolis, and racial justice, and to share perspectives. I've been struck while I'm on the council about the different perspectives people have in their relationship to their government and their city. And I don't think everybody realizes what different perspectives there are in terms of what we think of our police or how our government responds to us. And as we hear more of that, I think it will help us come to kind of a common understanding of where we need to go next. And that's part of what I hope to get to tonight. The agenda's on the wall. There's a great quote that hopefully you looked at. It kind of sums up the thesis there. You have an opportunity to do that, but I'm going to let Councilmember Yang do a little introduction, and then I'm going to ask you to just do a really brief introduction too.
Thanks, Cam. Good evening. My name is Long Yang. I represent the 5th Ward, which is, when people talk about North Minneapolis, they're talking about Ward 5. And, you know, really glad to be here tonight. We had our first part of our public hearing, which was on the 6th. And we will have our second public hearing, which is on the 20th. And so it's just next Wednesday coming up. And you know, anyone who wants to come there to share, you know, your thoughts on these 2 things, I mean, please let us know. But you know, Cam is kind of the brains behind the lurking ordinance repeal and the spitting repeal. I mean, for me, I will just be very clear how I feel about both of them. I mean, I think the spitting ordinance needs to be repealed because it's just stupid. I mean, frankly, you know, I just think that, you know, anybody who spits should not be put in jail for 90 days. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. You know, I think it's bad taste. I think, you know, good people with good manners don't do that sort of stuff. Or let me just say that again, good people with good manners do those things. They don't get arrested. Yeah. The lurking ordinance, I mean, to me, you know, I think what's compelling about it for us to repeal is just that it doesn't make any sense. You read that, you don't know what the heck it means, basically. And we should not have laws that allow for so much discretion that, you know, it basically gives unfettered discretion for our police officers. You know, and I'm not saying our police officers are bad, I'm just saying, you know, in those sorts of situations, I mean, it becomes a policy decision for lawmakers like Cam and myself and my other colleagues to really decide what we need to do with this. And I think, I mean, that's why we should repeal it, because it doesn't make much sense. It's unconstitutional, you know, in terms of being vague, and, you know, I think in terms of covering things that, you know, are allowed, that, you know, basically just is not good for us. And so that's kind of where I'm at with that. And, you know, with that being said, I mean, I'm glad that you all are here. I mean, this is like the 500 people that were supposed to be here. I think they're somewhere on Hennepin Avenue or somewhere over there. Because
they're looking for this place, actually.
Yeah, maybe that's it too. Yeah. So you know, it's good. But, you know, I want to say this really clearly, folks. Just because, you know, I think it's really important that, you know, the folks who are on the other side of Cam and myself, I mean, I think they're terrified that, you know, we're taking the tool away from cops, and so, you know, Minneapolis is just going to go into chaos and disorder. And I'm going to tell you very clearly, I mean, with the repeals, it's not going to change all that much of anything that happens in the city of Minneapolis. And so, you know, for the folks who feel confident about where Cam and I are, I mean, please let your neighbors who are terrified know that nothing changes. You know, and that, you know, they should continue to call 911 in situations in which they feel the sense of, you know, somebody suspicious, you know, walking around their neighborhood and those sorts of things. We continue to call 911 and do what they're supposed to do, let the police do what they're supposed to do, but I don't think it changes anything. So thank you very much, and we have not 500 people, so we can go around and introduce each other. So why don't we just start right over here and then just go all the way back and all the way around. And, you know, I tell you a joke, this is my joke for tonight. I had another good joke that I'm just going to share one. The park board got so scared that there were 500 people who accepted coming to this event that they sent a suit here. My good friend Paul Yeager in the back there. So, Paul, welcome. Thank you.
That's my good former soccer coach, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
So maybe you can just say your name and affiliation or something else if you want to.
Sure. I'm Meg Ewing, and I'm here with the Coalition for Critical Change.
I'm William Smith from North Minneapolis. I'm with the coalition also.
Nancy Hussig with the coalition.
I'm Paul McCady. I'm here for a lot of reasons. So,
Rose Brewer, I'm one of the facilitators tonight.
I'm Maria Asp. I'm with the Million Artists Movement.
My name is Enrique Ginch. I'm a resident of this neighborhood.
I'm Suzanne Storich, also a resident here in Kansas.
Steve Clemens, I'm a resident of the neighborhood and also part of the community of St. Martin.
My name is Fahad. I'm with Save the Kids and Black Free Thinkers in Minnesota.
My name is Matt Bartholomew, and I live in Whittier, and I'm a concerned community member.
Ooh, you just helped me know what to say. I'm Matthew Harris. I'm from the Phillips neighborhood, and I'm also a concerned community member.
Hi, I'm Kay Pitney. I live in Northeast Minneapolis. I'm a concerned community member.
Laura Sanchez, MPS, same as you, Whittier, and
I'm Sarah Huffman. I'm actually a member of the Brooklyn Park community, but I serve homeless youth of Minneapolis and also a concerned citizen.
Sam Law, one of Nancy's students.
I'm Love Miala. I'm an artist and an activist.
Oh,
I'm Peter Molinar, actually. I'm a member of the Communist Party of Minnesota, among other popular organizations.
oh, I'm Gabe, and that's my dad.
And I'm Paul Yeager, and I make sure that Gabe has good ice to skate on and Cam's friend.
I'm Fred Kreider, an interested citizen.
I'm Bill Sarm with The Uptake, and we're live streaming tonight.
Chuck Turchik, ordinary citizen, just came in out of the rain.
Hey, I'm Ron Harris. I work for Minnesota Neighborhoods Organized for Change.
I'm Robin Garwood. I work for CAM.
And I'm Mary Yang and work with Law.
Well, wonderful. We've got I don't know, we need the microphone? I don't know if it helps with what
I think you need it.
Okay. We should keep that in mind for later, too. The agenda calls for the introduction phase, which we're in. We're going to move into a presentation. We have a PowerPoint presentation to make. I'm not sure if my sound system is...
It's fine.
Okay, good. And Rose Brewer is going to help with that. And then we're going to have some time with an open mic, and maybe we'll come up here if people want to talk. We'll see how that goes, but hopefully we can have a conversation where we all feel comfortable too, and you can share some of your thoughts and your ideas. And I'm going to go over to the slides and turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Cam. Welcome, everyone. One of the reasons there are not 500 people here is because there is a march in solidarity with the young man who was killed in Madison, Wisconsin. There was a gathering last night, and I just saw on Facebook that there's another one tonight. So I'm certain that some of the folk who would be in this space are probably there at the Hennepin County Government Center. So don't despair too much. I mean, you have an intense competition with this. You know, I want to say a couple of things before we actually get into the slide presentation. That very evocative quotation by Michelle Alexander has certainly pushed this issue around mass incarceration in a way that has made many of us sit up and think, and it has become a tremendous resource for people around this country and globally. Sometimes I wonder, however, if folk locally think about the issues raised in the new Jim Crow as out there rather than right here. And I want us to think about it as being right here in the Twin Cities, right here in the state of Minnesota, right here in terms of the challenges that we're facing around structural inequality whether it be in the criminal justice system or housing or the economy. And those do converge, as you all well know. I wanted to say that the old Jim Crow was a system that was put into place very, very, very soon after supposedly slavery ended. Of course, it didn't really end. And one of the ways it continued was through a series of what was called black codes at the time. And you all probably have heard, or some of you may have heard about the black codes. But they are very similar to what we're dealing with, that any black person who was seen as loitering or resting or not involved in, quote, useful activity was subject to arrest and incarceration. That was a pretext, and these are pretext kinds of arrests. At that time, it was about re-instigating slavery because they needed people to do the economic work. So it became slavery in all but name only. That strategy continued actually deep into the early part of the 20th century. So slavery didn't technically end until almost the 1940s. It's an incredible story that needs to be lifted up. But those pretexts have been held on to, and they take the form of really criminalizing black bodies in a way that you'll see in this data. And you know, despite the feeling that there is a sense of fairness and justice around these issues, if we look at how deeply they're entangled with institutional racism, then you have to take another look-see. Because an arrest that seems on the face of it a misdemeanor or something that's, quote, relatively benign, actually has tremendous consequences for the people who are in the crosshairs of that arrest. Whether it be juveniles who are missing curfew, you get pulled into the criminal justice system, and you get involved in the process that perhaps eventually leads to deeper incarceration. The arrests add up. So there's a complexity around this, that it's not that benign. And some of the data is really quite striking. It's not that there is a disproportionality in terms of who's committing the crimes. It's a disproportionality in terms of who's arrested. That's the bottom line. If it was even across the board, perhaps that would be one thing. So this criminalization is alive and well in the Twin Cities. It has a particular target to it, and the data speak for themselves as we get into the slideshow. So I just wanted to put that in a little bit of context. The old Jim Crow is not all that old. It is a new Jim Crow, alive and well, and it's rooted very deeply in systemic and structural racism in all of our institutions. So that's what we're dealing with. Racial profiling is a term that has gotten a lot of attention over the last few years, but it means on the basis of one's, quote, racial ethnic status, you are selected out, you are targeted, you are, in fact, perhaps arrested. And what we're dealing with in terms of the lurking and spitting ordinances are what many analysts call pretext stops. On the face of it, they don't mean very much, but they can take on meaning because these low-level offenses snowball into arrest and, in many instances, incarceration. Why target? Why profile a particular population? Well, we'll get into that a little bit more as you see in the second data site. Despite no statistical differences in rates of violation, people of color, especially blacks, are targeted for Terry stops and arrests. These are these low-level offenses. To the extent that it just couldn't be accidental. You know, there is a rhyme and reason to who is selected out and who is ultimately arrested. So you want to move it on? I've given you a little bit of this historical context. The slave codes morphed into the black codes. The black codes were really rooted in economic exploitation, a way to get African Americans back into slavery. And the pretext was you were up to no good. If you were resting, if you were relaxing, if you were, quote, loitering, and many people were brought into the penal system through this process. Today, the continuity involves what some people call livability crimes. They were a part of the old Jim Crow, and they continue to be a part of the issues that we're dealing with today. Livability for whom? What are public spaces for? For whom are public spaces? I heard there's someone here that's working with homeless youth. Are public spaces for homeless youth? They should be, but are they? Does the downtown become a space for all citizens or just for some? I think these are the kind of critical questions that have to be asked and thought about. So we can move on. More on, this horrendous set of statistics around the United States and mass incarceration. We have 2.5 million people at least who are currently incarcerated, but if you look at the relationship to the criminal justice system, if you look at the people who are on probation and parole, those numbers ratchet up to at least 13 million, and perhaps even more. One of the things that we need to be very, very sure about, that connection between so-called low-level crimes. If you are on probation or parole and you're stopped for a low-level crime, you're recircled back into the system. How do you get out of that? So it becomes a triple, quadruple whammy. We don't hear that in the discussions about what's at stake here. So this is greater than someone's comfort zone. One of my colleagues who's here and I did a talk at the U a week or so ago, Nancy Heisek, who is the key organizer for the Coalition for Critical Change. And one of our graduate students raised the issue of comfortability, being comfortable here in the state of Minnesota. For white Minnesotans, comfort means having a particular lifestyle, a particular way of moving in the world, and certainly not having to deal with hard, critical issues around homelessness, houselessness, there's no place to sit downtown, economic dispossession. But I want to be safe to go to the Twins game, and I want to be comfortable to go to the new football stadium that's going to house the Vikings. And so liberalism and comfortability need to be unpacked around these particular issues that we're dealing with. Whose comfort is at stake and under what conditions? And we'll see some more statistics that indicate just what a divide we're talking about in terms of who's comfortable and who's not. You can move it on. We're one of the worst in the world, as you can see right at the top there. There's the old US of A. I guess that's purple or black. I'm not sure which one that is. And you can see the rest of the world in terms of mass incarceration. This has intensified over the past decades. Two or three decades ago, there were about 300,000 people incarcerated. I'm not sure about the time frame here. Today, as I said, over 2.5 million or so. A lot of it has to do with low-level crimes leading to repeat offenses, leading to permanent incarceration. So it's not anything to play around with. This gives you more of the breakdown of where people are locked up, how they're locked up, local jails, state prisons, federal prisons, and it all adds up to that massive number. So we can move on. Keep this idea in mind. I mean, I think this is the core of the matter. Despite no statistical differences in rates of offending, the poor and people of color, particularly African Americans, are overrepresented in these statistics at every phase of the criminal justice system. 50% of all prisoners are African American, primarily male, but the numbers of African American females are on the rise. 30% are white, 20% are Latinos, and of course 50 to 70%, keep this in mind, of all inmates are sentenced for non-violent crimes. Critical. And here's a visual. all men, white men, black men, Latino men, 1 in 3 for black men, white men 1 in 17, Latino men 1 in 6, all men 1 in 9, all women 1 in 56, white women 1 in 111, the least likely, black women 1 in 18. Not so least likely, right? Very likely. And Latinas 1 in 45. Okay. You tell me where you want me to cut this off. Continue with Minnesota? Yep. All right. Minnesota ranks 13th in rates of racial disparities in correctional populations. You know, although the African American population has grown, the disproportionality is still very striking. On average, 9.1 African American males are incarcerated in this state for every 1 white male. African Americans represent 3.5% of Minnesota's population, but 36% of the adult male prison population. And this gets to the heart of why we're here tonight, looking at the repealing of lurking and spitting ordinances. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that. Well, Rose is kind of the expert on the big picture, and now I just want to drive in a little bit to the smaller picture, because as a city council member, I feel some kind of responsibility. Sometimes people call me a lawmaker or a legislator, so I want to make sure that we're working on good laws, we're passing good laws. I also want to make sure that we're not somehow being swept up in something as terrible as a mass incarceration of a significant group of our population. I have actually been working a long time looking at the racial disparities in our city and our state, trying to look at the wealth disparities, the education disparities, especially the employment disparities. And it's connected to this same issue right here. If you look at Minneapolis itself, there's the disparities in the arrest rates here, and that's what some of this tells you right here. This is data that's from the ACLU and our own Minneapolis Police Department, saying that the likelihood of being arrested for marijuana possession is very different if you're black or if you're white. And for disorderly conduct, it's very different. And for vagrancy, which actually we don't have a vagrancy on the books. I think vagrancy is one of the classic poor crimes or black code crimes. That was a law that was just basically used to say, if you're not employed, we can arrest you, and once you're arrested, we can have you work for somebody and we'll get the money. Does that sound like something else? But vagrancy actually is repealed in the statute. The national statistics still collect data on vagrancy based on some of our other lesser offenses and lesser crimes. Mostly what that means for Minneapolis is things like handhandling. That in the FBI record, the national database would be considered a vagrancy crime, and it gets put in there. And so when the ALCU and others are trying to report based on the national statistics, it comes up as vagrancy sometimes. Probably more information than you necessarily wanted. But the same thing also happens for juvenile curfew and loitering. And sometimes those juvenile curfew crimes are some of those first entry-level things where people get to know the police and they start to label themselves as one type of person or another type of person. And when some people are picked up for curfew when they're juveniles, they get taken home. Maybe they get a little bit of a scolding in the process, and others get taken downtown to the juvenile curfew center. And that's a choice that somebody has to make. And from the statistics, it looks like you're more likely to get arrested for it and taken downtown if you're a person of color than if you're white. The same holds true for 2 other ones. So those are laws that we're not repealing. Now I just want to talk about a couple that we are, and the first one is our lurking ordinance. And this is a misdemeanor. We also have some smaller, lower level crimes called petty misdemeanors. This is not a petty misdemeanor. So in fact, this is more serious than, for example, being arrested with a small bit of marijuana, which is a petty misdemeanor. So I actually read a police report where somebody was picked up and they had a small amount of marijuana, but they weren't charged with that. Instead, they were charged with lurking, because that's a misdemeanor and it's a higher level crime, and they got arrested for that, which I thought was very interesting and strange. But I just want you to look at the laws as written, and Blanc kind of talked about that a little bit before. No person in any public or private place shall lurk, lie in wait, or be concealed with intent to commit any crime or unlawful act. And I think it's just so, did you call it stupid? Or was that the spitting one? But this is, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's also kind of interesting, what were they thinking when they wrote that, and who wrote that law? So if you look at that law, you can infer, one, it's perfectly fine to lurk, conceal yourself, and lie in wait. It's okay to intend to commit a crime. But you put those two together, watch out. And it's just interesting. So we can go to the next slide. And this tells you a little bit about some of the low-level offenses. And we looked at 6 years of data, and 59% of the people arrested for lurking were black, while 24% were white. And actually, the total is a little higher for just generally people of color. 69% who called in to report lurking offenses listed on our crime reports as either victims or witnesses were white. If you go to the next slide, you can see that a little more graphically. And this is kind of a teachable moment. And so I was a teacher for years, and we always look for teachable moments. If you haven't figured this out yet, the repeal of lurking and spitting is a teachable moment for me, and it might just take a few months, but we'll see. So hopefully we're learning something. But this in particular, if you look, you can see that 60% of the people who are calling about suspicious persons, and that's probably what the call is that gets you in trouble for lurking. Somebody sees somebody and thinks they don't belong here, they're up to no good, something's wrong. This just makes me think, okay, it's probably not just the police. And maybe we all figured that out anyway, but we just can't be blaming one segment of society or one little part of society. There's more players that have bought into this whole narrative. And if you read Michelle Alexander's book, she talks well about how the narrative is connected to the war on drugs. The narrative is connected to Nixon's election. I mean, the narrative goes back to this law and order issues. It's when the war on poverty switched to the war on drugs, and all of a sudden, everybody who ever ran for office had to run on law and order. And I think even to this day, somebody running for office is afraid not to run on kind of a law and order public safety issue. You might even remember recently, it was the big #1 issue, I think, in one of Rybeck's runs for mayor. And there was, so even in Minneapolis, it's really important to people, and their law and order is. And of course, we want everybody to be safe. Everybody to be safe. And we want to figure out how to really get there. And I don't think this is the way to do it. It also doesn't really offer the kind of instruction you want the laws to offer. It is so vague and overbroad. Basically, it's really hard to tell when you're actually lurking with the intent to commit a crime or not. What does that look like? How do I make sure I'm doing that? And we even see people who get arrested for lurking to commit a crime who don't appear to be lurking at all. They're actually walking down the middle of the street, pulling on car doors. So pulling on car doors, that seems maybe they have an intent to do something, but they'll get arrested for lurking. I also think it's irresponsible of lawmakers to let a law like this stand, because it gives no instruction to the police about really what you're supposed to look for, and then it gives no help to the attorneys and the prosecutors and the courts for actually how do we prove it. So there's no proof there. And the door is wide open for discretion for the police and for the prosecutors and for everybody. So much discretion that it opens the door for bias. I think at the public hearing we heard an interesting phrase, is it empowers racism. So maybe it's not racist itself, but this just kind of empowers racism. So if there's a little bit of it there, it can go right in there. And I'd actually say this empowers classism. Because if you actually look at the data and the information, it's poor people. These are laws to control the poor, or basically criminalize poverty.
And they're interconnected because the disproportionate number of the poor are obviously black poor.
And everybody hopefully heard that. They're interconnected because of the proportions of people who are in poverty and their race. Also, what we hear a lot, and maybe some of you are here thinking this too, is this is a tool we need, it's a tool in the toolbox, how else are we going to handle any of these problems that come up? So we did a little bit of research, mostly Robin, but we looked at the ordinances of the 100 largest cities in the United States. We found out in most of them lurking doesn't even appear anywhere in the code or anything like lurking. It does appear in some of them. There's about 5 where lurking with a concealed weapon or a gun, that's prohibited. There's 2 where lurking and loitering are put together, and that mostly has to do with you can't lurk with the intent to sell drugs or engage in prostitution. And there are only 2 of the 100 largest cities that have a standalone lurking law like ours. In Minneapolis, us, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they're very similar, although they're a little bit different. So I don't know that we copied them or they copied us or anything like that. But that's only 2, which should tell us and everybody else that a lot of these big cities that we might even admire, Austin, Seattle, Denver, Boulder, think of one, I know Minneapolis is best, but think of the 2nd or the 3rd best cities or whatever, and they apparently have enough tools in their toolbox to maintain public safety at these certain levels and maybe even have lower levels of crime than us. We also looked at a lot of the reports and the records. We read through last year's police reports, and almost always when somebody's picked up for lurking, there's other charges that are put on them as well. Most of them, in fact, get dismissed. The only ones that were convictions last year were because the people confessed to it. That could have been as part of a plea bargain, or maybe they just admitted, yes, I was hanging out in the alley with these spray cans because I was going to do graffiti. Let me just pay my fine and get out of here. You know, I mean, I don't know. But that just shows that we're not going to court. The judge isn't looking at them. We're not really prosecuting many of these cases at all. And maybe you think if they're all dismissed, what's the worry then? Well, the problem is they get dismissed. They're not bothering the city anymore. They're not tying up the courts, but they're sitting on somebody's record. And we heard at our last community meeting, and we heard at the public hearing, there are instances where somebody's trying to get housing. Maybe they're homeless, they're working. That's what I think we heard at, I think it was the public hearing, but we heard from a caseworker working with somebody to get homeless, and it was the lurking on the arrest record, and maybe they couldn't get the house. And they might not get another chance to get that kind of housing, and they might not get in there. And that's actually kind of how a whole new Jim Crow can kind of work. Because suddenly you have an arrest record. People can do background checks. And it doesn't even have to be the government anymore. It's just private individuals thinking they're doing the right thing. And so now they're going to make sure they don't hire anybody with lurking on their arrest record. Because lurking, and we heard this too, it just sounds creepy. Maybe if you have spitting on your record, it isn't a big deal. People know what spitting is. They know what it means. But lurking sounds like it's probably some kind of a sexual offender or something. It's something that's I don't know. So they don't think of somebody sitting on the internet not participating in the conversation, usually when they see it on your arrest record. So I think it's obsolete, and the conviction rate is very low, but I think that some of these unintended consequences and this collateral damage is very significant. So I want to quickly get onto spitting here. I'm not really keeping time, so I hope that's all right. Spitting is a little bit different, although it's very similar, and I have to tell you that spitting was not an ordinance that I was actually looking at repealing. I actually attempted to repeal the lurking ordinance in 2008, and we failed on a tie vote at the council to repeal that. So I was eager to look at this again when it seemed like there was public and community interest to looking at it again, but then people say you also need to repeal the spitting ordinance, because the spitting ordinance is used more as the pretext kind of crime, and it's tagged on, so it gives the police an excuse. And really what we were hearing was complaints from individuals, mostly people of color, mostly on the north side, that no, they got me for spitting, and they talked to me about spitting, and then they searched me for spitting, and they detained me this long time. Maybe you weren't even charged with it, but it led to this this opportunity to do this frisking. And the whole war on drugs and the whole strategy of the broken windows, and there's a lot of kind of crime work that's been going on, and this trying to respond to the most minimal offense and figure out if you can find a felony there or a bigger crime is actually the way to make our communities safer. And maybe it was, and maybe there was a rationale for that, but lo and behold, look what we've actually stumbled into, the new Jim Crow, where we're incarcerating black males at an enormous rate, and when you have 1 strike and you're out, or 2 strikes and you're out, or 3 strikes and you're out, you end up taking them out of their families, out of their communities, and out of the economic system for a long period of time, and maybe forever. And So the little thing like spitting
Oh,
on the
they're back
side.
in the economic system, they just ended in prison, making 60 cents a day.
Okay, I stand corrected. I stand corrected. But the spitting ordinance was actually written at the turn of the century, 1898, when there was a tuberculosis epidemic going on. People were desperate to figure out what's causing the spread of this disease. Hundreds of Minneapolis residents were dying a year then. I think it peaked at almost 300. It died in the early 1900s from tuberculosis. And they thought, we better get a handle on this. I think they were also looking at a whole bunch of people chewing tobacco, spitting all over the place in restaurants and bars and all over, and they said, we've got to do something about it to regulate this. So that's when this got passed. And I will tell you, just as my co-sponsor, I don't think spitting all over the place is reasonable or a very nice thing to do. And just like I don't think sneezing all over the place without covering your mouth is a very good or manly thing to do. We actually got some calls from somebody. I'll tell you this one little story because it just struck me as what an interesting job I have. So somebody said, how can you want to repeal spitting? Spitting is really gross and it's unhealthy. You can't do this. Even though you can spit on ball fields and boulevards and streets, but you can't spit on the sidewalk and all these other places. So I said, oh, well, I gave her my little explanation. It's an old law. It doesn't really help with tuberculosis prevention because it's airborne, and once it's down on the ground, it's okay. And we don't, have laws against, not washing your hands after you use talking to them or whatever. And I'm going to send along the ordinance because once she reads all this verbiage, she's going to see what a ridiculous, silly rule it is. So I sent it to her, and she wrote back to me and said, oh, so now you want people to be able to spit in the market, in buildings, at the depot, in the theater, in churches? That's what you're trying to tell them? They should all go spit everywhere? So no. But we don't think it should be a misdemeanor crime. And NPR did report that in 2013 they found somebody who actually had to spend 90 days in the workhouse for spitting on the sidewalk. And that seems a little ridiculous to me. It's the kind of thing that get handled in some other way. There's also disproportionate applications of this. We looked at the numbers and they're on the handout there. I don't have them memorized and I don't know that we have a slide on that, but maybe we do. Let's see what the next one says because I mentioned all that tuberculosis. We don't. But basically, we looked back at last year and all the peoples whose race was identified except one were African Americans. There were, is it 29 instances. Most of them, half of them or so, the race wasn't identified. But it just shows that not only is it just backs up some of the anecdotal evidence that we had with it. And there was only one case in 2014. So this actually, the police and pretty much everybody admits that this isn't very useful. We don't even need it in our toolbox. Although we do hear from some people that think it's a health concern and it's just bad manners. And the downtown council, however, and some others have said this is a civility kind of issue and we should keep it in place. We have actually a lot of supporters. You got a sneak preview of all our supporters. Organizations supporting this, and I'll tell you this right now, some of them actually came to us saying we should do this now. Long and I are working on getting a more full accounting of all the low-level offenses and data about it, like where are the arrests, who's getting arrested, who's getting charged, who's getting into diversion programs, so there's no charges on their record. But we decided to move ahead with these two ordinances first, and I have to tell you it's because we were basically listening to the community and trying to take their lead. Not that people aren't concerned, and some of you might not be concerned as well about this and what does it mean. So there's a couple little things that are still coming up. We've had a few communities on this in a public hearing, but I do want to highlight, we mentioned this earlier, but the next public hearing is May 20th at 1:30. It'll be in the council chambers. We'll get some staff reports and then we'll take public testimony on these, probably almost certainly just on both ordinances together, kind of like we're doing it tonight. And the final vote is expected on June 5th. And that's, there'll be no public testimony at that. People can come and listen and they can watch if they want. That's the full city council meeting. Our hope would be that the committee, after the public hearing on the 20th, would recommend repeal of these two ordinances and move it to the council for recommendation, and then it will come up on the 5th. So we want to take a little time to give you a chance to talk and share some of your stories or experiences or concerns, maybe why you don't want to see these laws repealed or why you think that it might be good idea. If you have any questions that we can answer to. Yes?
I was just wondering, is this all taking place through the council, or will it go to ballot?
This is all a council
Okay.
thing.
That's
so
good.
The question was, does this all take place at the council level, or does this have to go to a ballot? This is just amending our code of ordinances so the council can do it. It could become a ballot initiative, I guess, and that sounds like a lot of work. This is the best, easiest way. Steve, now, what do you think about making people come up here and use the mic, or me trying to get them the mic, folks?
I can speak loudly. All right. I'm just wondering if there are any other council members taking a public position on this.
Yes.
Ask about Councilmember Warsami, because I'm from his district.
You know, I'm not exactly sure how public Councilmember Warsami has been. I would say that my reading of him so far is he's sympathetic to the repeal. Does anybody know of a public statement, or has he put out any blog posts or anything like that? Because that's where we really get that. But I think that's kind of the read we have. Is so you could contact him though, because even if somebody's leaning or they seem supportive, and contact him if you think he shouldn't be. But contact any council member, especially if there's more resistance from the other side. I mean, especially your council member. Let them know what you think. I'm a constituent. Here's my opinion on this. I hope you'll do this. So, yes.
What's the likelihood of passing? Like, is there a lot of support on the council? And then, secondly, are you looking for like more organizations to join the coalition of support?
Yes, it would be fine to have more organizations joining the coalition of support. So that would be great. I think I am more optimistic than I was in 2008. I'm not sure how to give you the read on that. I don't want us necessarily to let up, and so I'm not sure that some people are organizing and some people here might be supporting the other side of this. So do you want to give a better read on the council, or do you think that was pretty good?
That's a good answer.
All right, it's a good answer. I don't want, the way I'm treating it now is this is kind of a full court press for me till the 5th. We have to keep our eye on the ball. We have to line up our supporters and keep our supporters there and try to build more support. My goal with all of these things is 13-0 vote, but I would be very happy if it's a 7-6 vote. We have, for those of you who don't know, there's 13 council members and we need a simple majority to pass these things. So that's what we count on. Other questions or maybe comments? Yes.
How is it that cops know that spitting is a crime, but pepper spraying a 10-year-old is not a crime? It's like, to me, it seems like the training issue is what is the problem with the Minneapolis police force. If they go around and use these over and over and over and over again, these two ordinances, it seems that it is not, they're not well trained to know that, these are not good ordinances to use.
Well, I will say this. They don't use them very much. So I don't want to have left the impression. So there were 65 lurking arrests last year out of 15,000 misdemeanor arrests. So these two aren't even the problem in terms of the racial disparity, in terms of the new Jim Crow. They're a little bit involved, and maybe they've been more of the problem in the past. But when you look at where the initial arrests come, a lot of times it's minor driving offenses, and then a lot of people, there's this pathway of getting your license revoked and still driving that really gets a lot of people completely caught up in it. But there's also disorderly conduct that seems to be more the preference. So they might engage you over a spitting or what are you doing here situation. But I also want to take, I don't know, I think there is training involved, but I also think we should take some of the blame because I think the history of Minneapolis, the police department have been under the instruction and the support and getting the backing of the people to please control the poor, and from policymakers and elected officials too, probably. That the city, it's really important that we make sure that our employers and our successful people can lead their lives properly and safely and aren't uncomfortable. And that's, as Rose used that term, sort of. So,
and that's my graduate student who coined it.
Okay.
I want to get proper.
So I think that's part of it. So sometimes they think, oh, a group of protesters out here yelling in the street, blocking traffic. My community wants me to get them off the street. And now this individual, I will say this, I think our police department, for the series of protests that have happened, have really come up with a good game plan, at least from the top. Figure out where they're walking to and block the traffic so the march can happen and the protest can happen. And we've got a pretty good record from when 35W got closed at the Minneapolis Police Department, telling the Highway Patrol they should do it, to, you can name another series, where every night as a council member I'm worried about, is somebody going to get shot? Is somebody going to get beat up? Are there going to be a bunch of arrests of these good people trying to help their community? And so last night there was like one of these things that, oh no, somebody messed up. And I think that's the sentiment, maybe a little bit, that somebody really messed up. And I'm not sure what's going to happen. You know, the chief put out a statement, they're investigating and they're looking into it. I don't think that somebody was worried that pepper spray all the 10-year-olds or anything. So it wasn't in the training manual, I'm sure. You're right, training's really important, and I shouldn't have maybe answered that lengthy, but other people can answer some of these questions too, and we can try to get more of a dialogue. Yeah?
Cam, there's another issue on this. There's the threat of ordinances like this. I mean, even if it doesn't lead to arrest, you know, but just the fact that they can be threatened with it, even there's no arrest on the record, but it's a tool that I know people that it's been used on, where they're threatened with arrest for spitting or lurking or something like that. No arrest was made, but the threat, and that is a tool of the police, and I don't think it's a good one.
I think you're probably right.
I mean, it's another reason to get rid of the excuses for it.
Yeah.
There's a question in the back there.
You want to stand up, maybe? Oh, there you go.
Has there been any response from any police department officials about this? Have they given you or the council any comment at all?
Well, yeah, so as council members trying to do a good job over any of these proposals, we try to hear from our professional staff and get some reaction and some response. I think there's also, we'll hear responses other places. So I think there was the new president of the police union was quoted as saying this is important. The lurking, I think he was quoted about the lurking issue, saying this is an important tool. They should have this tool that helps prevent crime. And there clearly are, when we had a meeting up in 4th Precinct. Yeah. So we also heard from the inspector there saying there's been some cases where we really think this helped us get some bad guys. Because we could get them on lurking and hold them on lurking, and then later find out they were the burglars who'd been, you know, haunting the neighborhood or whatever. So we hear that, but we also there seems to be a sentiment at the top level of the department that this is a policy decision. There's so few lurking arrests that are made. We understand, and the city attorney we also talked to. The city attorney actually said something that was pretty powerful, I thought, and insightful, because she said. Yes, it's a tool. Yes, it's maybe helped us in a few cases. But we also see a big risk with this kind of law and the way it's working, because it's undermining the social contract that we have in society. Because there's this kind of this deal that we've struck. We're going to try to keep our democracy well enough, and we're going to try to keep our rules reasonable, and you are going to let there be a government that makes rules and a police department that enforces them, if you know what I mean. I mean, this is kind of the social contract that helps make us avoid a lot of social strife, probably. And so that's a big piece of this. And I think that's going to get a lot of support, too. And I think the community is desperate to say, please do something, government. Please do something, police department. And repealing these little laws that are not even used very often would just be a small, good step in the gesture. So I think they kind of, the police, at least the upper level police get that, and the city attorney, that building community trust is really important.
Yeah, just to follow up, you mentioned the new police union president. Is it at all concerning to you as a council member about his past and sort of the trouble that he's been in with his group and racist tendencies, that he was elected by such a kind of overwhelming vote by Minneapolis, ranking police officers.
Yes. Although one thing I heard from one of the officers is a whole lot of officers don't even go and participate in those votes. So, so I'm not sure. Maybe they should, if they have a different view of how they want in the police union leadership. Or maybe that shows the union isn't seen as being that useful. I'm not sure. But yes, well, I was kind of surprised. And he has a reputation, and I know about his reputation.
Just in response to your estimate of how many police officers voted,
yeah, you
the
know
vote was something in the neighborhood of 400 and some to 200 and some. And
Okay.
we only have 850 police officers, so it was a significant vote.
Yeah, better voter turnout than for a lot of council races. So I will say that, but that's 200 who weren't there. And they, maybe it could have flipped it if they had shown up. Of course, the choices weren't that great. Right? Yes.
I confess that in 1970, when I was 20 years old, I was guilty of a petty misdemeanor. I actually spent 2 days in jail. But I was told at the time it would be removed from my record. But hearing what you have said, and then given events that occurred like 40 years later, I think it was still on my record. What is actually the case? And then, you know, I worked 35 years in an iron foundry. When does society consider me not to be partially criminalized? And this is related also to the campaign by Knock and Isaiah, Free the Vote campaign. Should we tell someone who wants to go straight and become a productive citizen that they're still considered a criminal as long as they're on parole and shouldn't even participate in civic society doing his duty? Wanting to vote should be promoted and not suppressed, just to state my case. So there's something here that's wrong if we aren't removing little criminal records from a person's record so they can go forward and be, you know, more of a free person. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I know that we do better with juvenile arrests, keeping that out of the hands of kind of the background checkers harvesting system. But what will also happen sometimes is the information will be collected, and so then even when we try to clear it out of the court system or the government system, somebody has that arrest record that they'll use to sell in their background checks somewhere else. So that's a problem. I also just want to point out that in Vermont, I believe, if you're in jail and you're a felon, you can actually can't vote. There's no constitutional right, there's no federal law that says people in jail can't vote. And we actually count the people in jail when we're doing redistricting as like part of the population. So it's just visibly strange. So I'm very supportive of that. Right.
So I just wanted to point out, I work for GAM. On the piece of paper back there, we did a little bit more analysis of the 65 arrests last year, and I just wanted to underscore something that Rose said. At every point, there's this sort of racial disparity, and in the decision whether to book somebody or cite them and release them, we booked. So we took to jail and put in jail for the night 74% of the people of color. We cited and released 44% of the whites. So it's different, you know. The impacts. Oh, I'm sorry. No, we booked 44% of the whites. Yeah. So your chances of getting arrested were much greater if you were a person of color for lurking. And then your chances after you were arrested for actually going to jail for the night were greater as well. So it's at every single step that it sort of just adds up.
Thank you. I'm still very troubled by this 10-year-old that got pepper sprayed. You can dismiss the police training. You know, he just didn't know. He looked like an 18-year-old on big mischief. Whatever that policeman is claiming. Is there any record made of brutality by that policeman that he will carry through his personal, professional life? Or is it just entirely absolved? And that I have a very big problem with. When we see people shot dead, black young people, and the cops get off scot-free, do you think I'm interested in standing up for cops? No, sir. I'm waiting for the moment when the insurrection comes, and then I'll take some. And I will be, oh, no. That's the one lesson that they will learn if there is an Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the state. It's not that I have a right to a gun. It's for the security of the state. If cops are taking rights into their own hands to overturn the rightful order of the country, they have become members of the Brits, as it were, back in the War of Liberation, when the United States fought against the Brits. These cops are overturning rights that citizens have, such as a 10-year-old boy being pepper sprayed. You say, listen to me. Do you like being shot at? I'm talking to you. And I don't know who said, I'm talking to you. Do you like being shot at? Without a reason. Is that just or is it not? And that's my problem. When a 10-year-old gets pepper sprayed, there is no justice, no reason.
Or a 20-year-old gets shot.
Or a 20, I mean, I'm sorry, 2 seconds after the cop shows up. Yes, I understand. We have a problem, sir. Cameron Garden, we have a real problem. Somewhere over here.
Yeah, that was me. Don't personalize my comment.
No, I'm saying we have, thank you. Thank you for being so honest. But we have a real problem in this country if things continue that way. Watch Baltimore, the district attorney. Watch Madison, Wisconsin, that district attorney. They do have a problem. And the Justice Department washing its hands. That's not good. In my opinion. Sorry.
Well, that's all right.
Sorry to be so long, and I apologize to the gentleman over there.
Be able to share, so I think that's just fine. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for that comment. I mean, I think it connects definitely to the situation of Jim Crow if we look at in the sense of police officers or law enforcers taking the right to end lives into context. That's nothing new. It's been happening towards black people since the Black Code, since like that's been a function of the system of criminalizing and ridding this community of their value. So for me, in a sense of one response to that, and consistently like from Chicago, if we're always talking about working with police officers and trying to reform that, so many cities have done that. And it's not going to be something that's going to be solved with putting a few token people of color in law enforcement. Especially if the culture is just want to assimilate them into perpetuating that violence in those communities as well. So being very conscious of what type of alternatives we're looking for, and I think it's something that has to deal with communities, with them taking justice creation processes back into their own hands instead of relying on that police officer lurking. How about you intervene and say what's happening in my community? Let's figure out how to work together and resolve that without calling 911, unless it's something violent, which often in the cases we're seeing in these ordinances is not. So keep relying on police officers to be the save a day in this process of eliminating racism and the concentration of imprisonment within communities of color, I think that's bullshit. Two, in the idea of gendering of these different loitering and lurking cases, as she mentioned earlier, Black women being 1 in 18 and being one of the fastest growing prison populations over the past decade, and even seeing some of the public incidents of Black women in Minneapolis being shot or being assaulted by police officers. Is there any other policies or ordinances? I don't know if those resonate with what's also criminalizing Black women, and I think that's often get lost in the case of criminal justice reform and what tracks Black women into the prison system, starting just as juveniles as well. So I would like to know in the sense of, is there some type of resonance with those two ordinances with Black women as well, and is it also going to help, you know, the lack of profiling in those cases too?
So I don't know directly that we've done a full comparison. I think you raised a really interesting and a good point. So we are expecting to get back in June those demographics of all our low-level offenses with the attorney's data as well as the police data. And so what you've said to me is, we're going to now be looking to see, is it that curfew, is it that truancy, is it disorderly conduct, what are getting especially our younger girls, but our women caught up in the system. And I think you raised a very important issue that it's easy sometimes when you look at that 1 in 3, oh, that's so bad, we have to focus right there. But the disparity between them was a 1 in 111 and the 1 in 18.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's actually bigger.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Yes.
Yeah, so my name is Bob.
Come up here if you want.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the work you're doing. It's interesting to learn about the spitting and lurking stuff, and I hope you're successful in having it repealed. I'm a registered nurse, and you know, there's another issue that ties in with the new Jim Crow issue, which is incredibly important, and I think that's ending the war on drugs, which is a huge topic, but I think we could narrow it down to you know, creating a situation where marijuana possession is treated as the lowest level possible, you know, offense at the city level. I know there's been some other cities that have worked on that. So that seems like it's something that we could try to tackle. I just wanted to say that's my opinion, and you know, can maybe respond to that. Thank you.
Well, I think that's one of the next things that I'm interested in looking at. Actually, when we got some of the reports from the ACLU and we were looking at marijuana arrests and the disparity there, and I think we've already seen there's an interest, I guess, maybe openness, especially of younger people, to more legalization, looking at this differently. The data really doesn't say it's any better or worse. Well, probably that you guys have a lot of data that says it's better than alcohol, but I mean, we have definitely legalized drugs, so why is this different, and all of those kinds of things. So I actually think that there might be some good potential to do that, because it wouldn't necessarily be an ordinance amendment. We could just redefine city policy. So part of what I have to think about, and my colleagues on the council, is what could we get 7 votes for? What's going to be the next steps? We're going to get reports. We do a lot of things that probably look like we're doing nothing, like even repealing, spitting, and lurking. Really? But if we understand that could be part of what can make the culture change or address some of these big issues, and if we can change consciousness, which is probably where it has to happen, and change hearts of our community as well as the people who work for the city, but I think it could make a difference. And I think that is something that there is some interest in some other council members, is how could we look at doing what some of those other cities have done to just declare it we're not going to enforce these small amounts, or you got a name for it, I think, but low level. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to, first off, thank you guys for organizing this. So I've been, first off, well, the numbers for, just to make it clear, for cannabis uses, you know, it's over 1,200 black people every year that are arrested in Minneapolis. And annually, if you include all people of color and white people, you're nearing 2,000 arrests every year. So just to put that out there, I personally have been raided, not in Minneapolis, in Hopkins, and my brother was selling just a little bit of marijuana. But not to deter from the conversation, what I really want to say is so I'm an organizer, I'm a father of 4, I've never been arrested, charged, or tried for any sort of serious crime, not even a disorderly conduct. I've never been in a fight in my life. I've never been hit in my face, I've never hit anybody else in the face. I've been in prison, or not in prison, in jail on 3 separate occasions for petty traffic laws. And on each occasion, I've had to pay hundreds of dollars in fines and go back to court numerous times. This is like, you alluded to it earlier, Councilman Gordon, and I just want to say, like, this is such an important conversation, especially for people of color, and I just want to commend you two for finally taking steps to do something about it. Like, I think there are more steps ahead, and we mentioned some potential other ordinances. I think that's great, and I hope you guys go that way, but I've been affected by it, and like still to this day, I'm dealing with the fallout of petty traffic ordinances because I've been profiled and pulled over for a broken taillight when I had red tape on my taillight, which actually allows me to legally drive with it. And the cop said, nope, your tape is dull, and I can see clearly through it. So I'm gonna pull you over, right? And like, I get these stupid tickets that drastically impact my ability to parent, my ability to work, my ability to be a community member, like my ability to be the person that I hope to be in my life. So like, I just want to commend you and thank you guys for doing that work, and hopefully like this continues to start something, because it's a real problem. There are thousands upon thousands of arrests in this city, and a lot of them are people of color. For these types of ordinances, driving ordinances, cannabis, low-level possessions, this is a huge problem, and like people are going to start moving from this city if we don't figure it out. Because I know I, for one, have thought about it. Because like it's not bearable. I don't like driving. I don't think I'm safe driving. Not only just like the regular dangers of driving, which is like the physical danger of driving, but like I have to look over my shoulder constantly and worry if a cop is going to pull me over because he's bored. You know? So like, from the bottom of my heart, like I commend you guys and like keep it up.
So I want to say this. So Cam was talking a little bit earlier about how some politicians, they run and they're really running on public safety, and I'm actually one of those guys. Actually, that was my top issue. I live on the north side. I like cops. I do, and I say that in this way. I like cops. I think that they serve a purpose in our society. But we need to be critical of them. We need to, hold them up to higher scrutiny so that they do what they're supposed to do, and that they are within the law. And I think that that's important to how we function as a civil society. And so it's important for me to, let folks know about that, because I think at the end of the day, I mean, this is, folks on the other side are going to say, Wong and Cam are anti-police. They just want to do this. They want to give license to everyone to spit and to lurk and all that stuff. That's not true. I mean, to me, I look at just spitting, and I just think it's stupid, really. I mean, nobody should go to jail for 90 days or pay a fine of $1,000 for spitting on the sidewalk. I mean, that's just ridiculous. All right. I think the other thing with lurking is this. I mean, again, anybody who reads that knows what that means. I mean, you should tell me, because I mean, I certainly don't know what that means, and I'm trained as a lawyer. I mean, and I read that, and it's not clear to me what it is. But I mean, when you look at how talking from the perspective of a person who has lived on the north side, I mean, we as a community struggle with the police in terms of whether we like them or we don't like them. But at the end of the day, I mean, when we have problems, we call them. So, anybody who calls the cops, I mean, they just expect a certain level of professionalism, a certain level of customer service, but they expect them to enforce the laws, and I think that's important. And when you look at, the slides that Cam put up there, one of the things that was really telling about those slides that the police did was this, that the folks who get charged, the folks who get arrested most for those sorts of crimes are black folks. But the folks who call are white folks. mostly, you know, and the numbers are almost, you know, kind of the same. You know, number of people who call, you know, about suspicious persons or any of that stuff, usually white folks, and it's in the 60 to 70 range. You know, number of black folks who get arrested or charged, I mean, 60 to 70% range. And to me, I mean, you know, when people look at those numbers, I mean, the one thing that they're not making conclusions about is this, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound bad, but I'm going to say it anyways. This is the problem. I mean, people talk about our police department, and they say, you know, the police department is racist, and I'm going to tell you, that's not quite true, because when you look at the people who are calling, that should just tell you that all of us are racist. I mean, as a community, I mean, our police department is an instrument of us. We make these phone calls, our police department responds, they do what they're supposed to do. And in a lot of ways, that's the reality that we're facing. And so I think that's the thing, is that, you know, sometimes it's really easy for us to quickly indict our police department as being bad and they're terrible and all that stuff. And there are certain circumstances where they're pretty terrible. But in a lot of ways, I mean, they do a lot of amazing things too. And I mean, I would encourage all of you to, you know, sign up, go on a ride along. I mean, the crap that police have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is amazing. And sometimes, you know, when you sit with a police officer in a squad car and understand what they do, I mean, it's incredible what they have to do. I mean, they have to know how to work that gun, they have to know how to clean that gun, they have to, you know, deal with their taser, they have to deal with the squad car, they have to deal with the laptop in the squad car, they have to deal with the printer there, they have to know every single criminal statute there is, you know, of state law, they have to know every single ordinance there is, they gotta know all of that stuff, and it's just, it's an incredible job, and, you know, they're humans, they're not perfect. And we want them to be perfect. I mean, I want our cops to be robots, but I mean, they're just not, they're human beings, and I think that's the thing, is that's not my defense of them, that's just me saying, we have to understand they're humans too, and they try, and no cop that I know of shows up every day at work and says, you know what, I'm here today because I want to discriminate against people. I mean, they don't do that. I mean, they show up, they try to do their jobs well, and you know, I think in a lot of ways, I mean, it's our jobs to basically help them to understand what the laws are. You know, in situations like this where we have laws that have a lot of discretion, we have to cut that. You know, and so when I look at the lurking ordinance, I mean, I think we are giving them incredible discretion, and I think that needs to be scaled back. You know, the spitting stuff, I mean, I think the same thing, is that really, I mean, you don't want to open the door for those folks to do that, because, you know, I mean, the spitting piece, I mean, I think sometimes, you know, you hear cops say, oh, you know what, we make arrests on those things because, you know, sometimes, you know, a bad person tries to spit on our shoes or tries to spit on us, and to me, I mean, that's not a good enough reason to arrest a person, because when you look at it, I mean, it's not the spitting that they're arresting the person for. I mean, it's that sort of disrespect. Or to me, if somebody spits at somebody in the face or spits at somebody, you know, on their body, it's an assault. So there are other offenses that can be used in those situations. And so, I mean, I just want to throw that out there. I mean, I think, I mean, this is not about police hating and any of that stuff. I mean, really, to me, it's about doing what's right as a society, and this is, to me, what's right.
I just wanted to say that I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like, I'm just going to throw this out there. I just kind of popped in my head, haven't thoroughly thought about it. But I think that maybe it really is a bad sign. I don't think we should ever even have to discuss whether we like cops or not, because that's irrelevant. That's just not even, whether we like them or not. We're talking about an institution of our society that is also is equally embedded in the historical dilemmas that we have. So talking about whether you like cops or not, I mean, it's like, it's very allegorical, and I don't mean only, people do this a lot, but I just think that, I think it's unnecessary and it detracts from the issue, because it's not about whether or not you like this person or whether or not you like this function, because on that issue, I think very serious discussions can be about how we define policing, law and order and that sort of thing, you know, maybe, but that's a whole nother issue. But I think talking about, so talking about whether you like cops or not is I would hope would be unnecessary, because there are serious issues at stake, serious lives at stake, and as a society, we're falling apart because of stupidity, because of hypocrisy, because of greed, because of just just a lack of concern because of improper values, because of improper modes of sharing resource and resource distribution, because of things that are totally antithetical to loving human beings and allowing human beings to have an opportunity to express their natures, good or bad, like them or not. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a couple people who I don't think have spoken yet. Why don't we go back there and then we'll come to you and then back to you.
I just think we gotta keep in mind that really what we're talking about is it's low-level offenses. Like Eric Garner was ultimately killed, but initial contact was for a low-level offense, for selling cigarettes in the street, selling loosies, okay? So this is what we want to stop. And if you have a law that is being used indiscriminately, is being used as a way to get contact with somebody, to start contact with somebody that you're afraid of, that's wrong. I mean, that's what we got to keep the focus on. And I think that that's what it is. It's all about this person looks fearful to me. I'm going to somehow profile him and initiate a contact. And if a law is seen as unjust and being enforced unjustly, it's going to it's going to get anger in response, and it's going to escalate. And anybody who works with people knows that if you've got something that's unjust, it's going to lead to further escalation. It's going to lead to these kind of conflicts where cops are killing people, and that's really where we got to keep the focus.
At a homeless youth shelter, so we serve 16 to 20-year-olds, and I kind of wanted to speak on like the types of people that come in and use our services. So I just started working at the Maple Grove, Brooklyn Park homeless youth shelter avenues, and of the 4 months that we've been open, we've had about 25 youth walk in our door and use our services regularly. 2 of those people have been Caucasian, only 2 of them. Many of them have had criminal records, but they're of these petty things. They've been pushed into the criminal system because they were hanging out on the street because they had nowhere to go. And not only that, but that throws them into the, the foster system. And because if they don't have a safe place to go, and in a way it's kind of picking that up, but it's also getting them into that criminal system. And working with these young individuals, it's really hard for them to understand. I've had conversations with them about how they feel like they can't walk outside the door because they're not going to be respected. And any chance a police officer gets, they're going to ask, what are you doing here? Why are you hanging out on the street? Go home. So that's kind of what I'm experiencing working with these young individuals, and I'm really sorry to say that that's my experience, and I hope that this will change.
One very quick one. My name is Enrique Gench, just for anybody who wants to know it, here I am. But there was a gentleman who talked about the marijuana arrests and all of that. Recently, very recently, within the last week, there was a police chief, and I can't remember the town, the city, but he had decided that he was not going to enforce it as a criminal act, but take people, I don't know if the word would be arrested, but found with marijuana to some medical rehabilitation service. This police chief just turned the rules around and said, these people need help. And that should be the police attitude. And that's what I would like to promote. Thank you.
And I actually think that should be more of our attitude. And we have sometimes some glimmers. So if somebody is out of work, if somebody's out of a home, if somebody's looking for something to do, we should be there to help them as a community and as a city. Absolutely. Not to intimidate them, kind of penalize them, push them into a criminal justice system where then they can never actually succeed. And it costs us all more to do the second choice, and it would cost us less, and we'd be better off. So that's kind of where we need to turn it. And maybe it isn't then, maybe it isn't all about policing, but also, that was obviously a policeman who did that. But maybe it's about, okay, maybe what police could do, or the training, or actually what equipment they always have, or maybe they need to work with non-police more like we do with homeless outreach workers in downtown. I think we should move into the fourth or fifth part of our agenda, but I thought there was a hand up where someone hadn't spoke back there. Yes, Marcus.
Yeah, my name is Marcus. I'm from the north side, and I've been a victim of the Lincoln ordinance. There was one time where a friend and I went down by Lake Calhoun early one Sunday morning, and there were no cars, no people walking, biking, anything. And one of the neighbors who lived up in one of these big houses across the street called the cops. So when we were walking back from the lake, the cop demanded we get in the squad car, told us someone had reported a black guy and a Latino guy prowling cars. And there were no cars anywhere except when we drove in. And my friend was a white guy, just had dark hair. So this type of shit happens every day. I've been pulled over 48 times on foot and vehicles. 49 times. Actually, a cop chased me downtown a couple weeks ago and gave me a jaywalking ticket. And he cuts me out over it. But I've been pulled over 48 times and I have no criminal record. And I know that these cops are looking for reasons to arrest people because of the police culture where they measure effectiveness based on the quantity of arrests as opposed to the quality. And the fact that we have like over 3,000 criminal laws in this country, those are some of the biggest contributing factors beyond just the plain racism. And I'd say that a lot of these cops are racist. I mean, the shit that they say to us, I mean, most of us who are victimized by them don't complain. Most of us are not getting jailed. It's not just people who are being arrested. We're being harassed out here without being arrested. We're being brutalized and not getting any charges against us. But we're being traumatized by this. So, I mean, I really appreciate you going at these low-hanging fruits with the spitting and the lurking ordinances. But I would strongly encourage you and will support you to go further. Keep going. Keep going.
So that was maybe kind of a nice ending, and, but nobody, now is there a couple slides, is there one slide left? Nobody asked this question, which is what can we do next? And I just want to put that up there, so if you want to get out your smartphone, you can take a picture or anything. I also want to tell you that if you want to know who your council member is, Robin has figured out a way that he can look it up on his phone and actually tell you who it is, so you can talk to him after this. You can submit comments, and if you just won't remember one of your council members' name, you can get the comment to the city and they'll get it to the clerks. And so, but that's the clerk that's in charge of the committee that can collect the comments. And we've got the public hearing coming up on the 20th, and people are welcome to come and speak then. I also wanted to give Ron Harris a chance to speak and give us a few words. Come on up here. I know that Ron down here, and maybe you can respond to some of what you heard, or whatever you want to do. And take
I appreciate the opportunity. Last week I had the awesome chance to testify at City Hall, which is an awesome experience. I recommend you guys go do it on Wednesday if you have the opportunity. So we know that these two ordinances do not deter crime. It's very obvious that there are other cities in the country who don't have either one of these ordinances, and we haven't shown that we deter crime better than they do. So that's a given. We also know that the implementation of these laws tends to fall on the backs of people of color. For example, last year I worked for Senator Al Franken on his political campaign for Senate, and I was in a part of Minneapolis where there's not a lot of folks who look like me, doing a little bit of door knocking. And all of a sudden I hear, whoop, whoop, and I'm like, oh, not today, not today. And so I kept on going, and the cop pulls me over when I was on foot and said, sir, we hear some reports of some suspicious activities and lurking going on in the neighborhood. I'm like, really? What do they look like? Let me know. Let me know what they look like. And so they explained that, you know, that someone had complained that they had saw me sneaking around the bushes and waiting around for people to come outside. And I, you know, showed them my clipboard and everything like that. I'm like, no, ma'am, I'm actually out here, you know, doing the good work, spreading democracy, encouraging people to go and vote. You know, and so that's just one example of how these laws can be implemented. We also know that most of us here have committed crimes at some point in our lives with no record, right? If you've ever sped before, you have been more dangerous than somebody who's smoked a joint in their living room. You pose more of a public danger to society than that guy who's in the living room enjoying himself a little bit, right? And also the criminal justice system as a whole, it used to be about deterring crime or punishing, preventing crime and punishing criminals. Since the war on drugs and you know, in the last few decades, it's now turned into control and management of the dispossessed. And the dispossessed tend to be poor, they tend to be of color, or they tend to be homeless. And so we need to we should challenge ourselves to look at the criminal justice a lot differently than we have been before. And then the final thing I want to say is that the repeal of these ordinances is much bigger than just this repeal, right? Once we pass this thing, this is just another step towards affirming that these lives do matter. It's showing that we're not quite there yet, but we're going to take these steps, because as folks get apprehended for lurking, as folks get apprehended for spitting, it socializes the rest of the folks who see this to assume that folks who look like me are less than, or we're more apt to commit crimes, or we're not worth the respect, or we're not worth the decency or the benefit of the doubt. And it's kind of perpetuating all these feelings that people already have, right? And so as we take these affirmative steps, and I applaud you two for taking these steps, we're showing our city that, yeah, your lives do matter, and we're going to create some policy changes in order to show you that. And it's the responsibility of all of us in this room to end this socialization, to end these stereotypes, to end these perceptions, right? The first step we took was showing up tonight after a long day of work, and I personally appreciate it. A lot of folks in this room haven't personally been affected by lurking and splitting ordinances, but you still showed up, and that shows that you do care. There's a list of things that we can do. If you can't show up on Wednesday, I would encourage you all to submit a formal comment. It's pretty easy, just state your name and just say why you don't support the ordinance. And then, and then share our stories, right? So the young man in the back, he just left, but feel free to tell your neighbors about that story. Tell them about, he's a parent of 4, with no record, not violent, not more prone to crime. He's been apprehended multiple times for being what he looks like. Tell Marcus's story about taking a jog around Lake Calhoun and then getting arrested or getting cited for checking cars when the only car around was the one that he drove. Tell folks about my story, where I'm just going out encouraging folks to get out to the polls and vote. Yet I got approached for being somewhere where I wasn't supposed to be, where I was somewhere that they weren't used to seeing people like me. And what that does to the psyche of somebody like myself, now when I see a police officer, I put my head down right away. I don't dare them, I don't look them in the eye. When I'm driving, I don't wear a flat bill cap. When I get pulled over, both of my hands are on the steering wheel. I'm not moving. If someone's next to me, I'm gonna pull up the camera. And nobody should live in fear like that, right? And again, in my opinion, it's because of these low-level offenses that socialize us, and that's the start of the criminal justice process. Like the brother back there said, Eric Garner was apprehended for a low-level offense, and it cost him his life. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who's apprehended or cited or approached based on a low-level offense is going to lose their life. Why should we take that chance over something like lurking, over something like spitting? Minneapolis, I think we're much better than that. I think that we call ourselves progressive, and now we need to back that up a little bit. And I applaud our council members for taking that step. And I applaud you all for showing up today. So thank you so much.
Well, I think that's it. I think we can stick around and talk a little bit if you want to. I really appreciate that, Ron, and I do think that sharing these stories really makes a big difference. Because I think sometimes those of us who've been pulled over before, maybe we forgot to put on our turn signal or something, made a turn, and the police pulled us over, and once they saw what we looked like, once they saw maybe our son sitting next to us in the car, they said, oh, I'm sorry, sir, carry on with your life. And we don't really think of that as a special privilege. Something that we have. And the whole story might be very, very different other. I think it's Ray Dean who likes to tell the stories. This is a state senator from North Minneapolis. I ride down Broadway. He says 2 or 3 times a day. I've been doing it for the last 13 years, however, since I moved in here. I've never been pulled over once. But every time I go down there, almost every time, I see somebody, he says, who's been pulled over. It's always a person of color. It's something who's right. It's another story that we can share. Of course, you've heard it. Maybe telling his stories. These stories can change a little as they go, but I think it makes a big difference. And maybe the most important thing we can do is talk to our family, our friends, and our neighbors about this bigger issue and what it's like. Because I really think that everybody does want people to have the same quality of life in the city, and we don't want to have some of them have such a hard time to get up with police. And that's what we're trying to do with the. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.